brains. If you can't tell, I like zombies a lot. I have a whole collection of things at my feet that I want to show and explain to you. George Romero is like the king of zombies.
Dan Felicia, yum.
Resident Evil, if you don't know, is a pretty huge franchise. Here's a stack to prove it, okay? First they started out with the first Resident Evil. This is a remake for the Wii. And then later on they made Resident Evil 0, which is a prequel. And they also made Resident Evil 2 and 3, which I have on my PlayStation 3 on the PlayStation Network. And then they also made, recently, Resident Evil 4, which is a really good game. I'm not going to go into details about it. And then they made Resident Evil 5, which is an okay game, but it's not that great. It's kind of just building off of what the fourth one is, and it's not really scary, anything like the fourth one is. And then they also made a couple of rail shooters for Resident Evil called, well, the first one is the Umbrella Chronicles, and the next one is the Dark Side Chronicles. And actually, I should also be talking about the Dreamcast too, because they also made a Dreamcast spin-off of Resident Evil called Code Veronica, which eventually got ported to the PlayStation 2 and I think possibly GameCube. I'm not sure. So those are all the games, and Resident Evil, huge franchise. Plus, then they even made a whole set of movies. I have 5 movies here. There's the first trilogy, which has Resident Evil Apocalypse, and Resident Evil Extinction, which they're good movies, but they kind of sort of lose the point of them, and they're more just action-y movies. And then they just recently started a new Resident Evil thing, and they came out with this pretty recently, Resident Evil Afterlife in 3D. I don't get what's the big deal about 3D, but it's kind of cool, but it's definitely not worth it. And then they also made an animated movie based off of the games called Resident Evil Degeneration. This sticks relatively closely to the game storylines. The movies, George Romero also obviously had an influence on Capcom's Dead Rising series. They also made the Resident Evil series, but they obviously had an influence on this because in the first game, you're trapped in a mall. Where else are the people trapped in a mall? Hint. It's Dawn of the Dead, George Romero's second zombie movie. Okay? And so then in the second one, it's the same thing, but it's in Vegas where there's casinos and stuff too, besides just a mall. One more thing I wanted to mention before I go is another person you can check out if you're interested in zombies at all is this guy named Max Brooks. He wrote this book called World War Z, which is an oral history of the zombie war. He also wrote the book The Zombie Survival Guide, which I haven't actually read. This one I've read, but that's definitely another thing to check out if you're at all interested in zombies. And if you're at all interested in comics, check out the Walking Dead comics series. And if you're not into comics but you're into zombies, check it out anyways, because I wasn't into comics. I'm still not into comics, but I like those comic books. They're good.